Some places aren't abandoned because people left. They're abandoned because no one ever came back. After surviving the mystery of the camera, Ethan Carter thought the nightmare was finally over, until a new evidence file appeared. Case number 428. Inside was a single photograph, an abandoned hospital, and one chilling sentence. The next recording begins here. Ethan returned to the abandoned evidence warehouse before sunrise. The building was exactly as he had left it. Silent, empty, cold. But something had changed. On the wooden evidence table, a brand new file was waiting. Across the front, bold black letters read, Case number 428. Ethan was certain the file hadn't been there before. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was only one photograph. An old hospital. Every window was dark. Every hallway looked empty. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "If you enter, don't look back." Ethan stared at the message. Then, somewhere deep inside the warehouse, he heard a hospital heart monitor. Beep, beep. Even though there was no hospital anywhere nearby, Ethan knew the next nightmare had already begun. Ethan followed the address from the evidence file until he reached the edge of the city. Hidden behind a rusted iron gate stood the abandoned hospital. The building was far larger than it appeared in the photograph. Its broken windows stared into the darkness like empty eyes. The main entrance was chained shut, but one side door was slightly open. As Ethan stepped inside, the heavy metal door slammed shut behind him. He rushed back and pulled the handle. It wouldn't move. His phone showed a full signal just seconds earlier. Now, there was no signal at all. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly ahead. The air smelled of dust and old medicine. In the distance, a wheelchair slowly rolled across the hallway by itself. Ethan ran toward it, but when he reached the corner, the hallway was empty. There was only a faded sign on the wall. Ward 13. Beneath it, fresh footprints appeared on the dusty floor, as if someone had just walked past him. Ethan looked up and silently followed them. Ethan followed the fresh footprints in complete silence. They led him through one empty corridor after another. Every hallway looked exactly the same. White walls, broken ceiling lights, rusted hospital beds. Then, the footprints suddenly stopped. Ethan looked around. There was no door, no window, no place where anyone could have disappeared. Confused, he turned around. His heart nearly stopped. The hallway behind him wasn't the same hallway anymore. The entrance where he had come from had completely disappeared. In its place was a long corridor filled with dozens of identical patient room doors. Every door had the same number, 428. Ethan slowly walked toward the nearest one. Before he could touch the handle, every door opened at exactly the same time. Creak. A freezing wind rushed through the corridor. Then, every hospital room light switched on together. At the end of the hallway, someone whispered, "You're late, Ethan." Ethan stood in front of room 428. Every instinct told him to walk away, but something inside the room was calling him. Slowly, he pushed the old wooden door open. The room was strangely clean. Unlike the rest of the hospital, there was no dust, no broken furniture. The heart monitor beside the bed was still running. Beep, beep. Yet, the bed was empty. On a small metal table lay a single patient file. Ethan opened it. His hands froze. Across the first page it read, Patient name, Ethan Carter. Age 32. Status, admitted. Ethan's breathing became heavier. The admission date was tomorrow. Then, a loud metallic sound echoed behind him. The room door slammed shut. The lights began flickering violently. The heart monitor suddenly changed. Beep, beep, beep. A flatline. At the exact same moment, the empty hospital bed slowly sank under an invisible weight, as if someone had just laid down on it. Ethan ran out of room 428. His heartbeat echoed through the silent hospital. The corridor seemed different again. The exit had vanished. In its place, a metal door stood slightly open. A faded sign above it read, "Medical Records." Ethan stepped inside. Endless shelves stretched into the darkness. Thousands of dusty patient files filled the room. Every cabinet was labeled by year. 1976, 1984, 1999, 2012. As Ethan searched for answers, one cabinet slowly slid open by itself. Inside, every file carried the same name, Ethan Carter. Confused, he grabbed the first file. Admission date, March 12, 1978. Ethan wasn't even born. He opened another. October 4, 1991. Another. July 18, 2006. Every decade, another Ethan Carter. Different patient numbers. Different signatures. But the same face stared back from every medical photograph. Then Ethan noticed the final file. It looked brand new. The cover read, "Admission date, tomorrow." Slowly, he opened it. Every page was blank, except the last one. In bold black letters it read, "Cause of death, pending." Ethan clutched the patient file and rushed out of the records room. He had to find a way out, but every corridor led him deeper into the hospital. Suddenly, a faint electrical humming echoed through the ceiling. Ethan followed the sound. At the end of the hallway, he found a steel door marked, "Security Control Room." The door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered every desk. Broken keyboards, rusted monitors, tangled cables hanging from the ceiling. It looked abandoned for decades. Then, without warning, every monitor switched on at the same time. Ethan froze. The screens showed live CCTV footage from every floor of the hospital. But something was terribly wrong. On one screen, Ethan was walking through Ward 13. On another, he was standing inside room 428. On another, he was running through a burning hospital corridor. And on the largest monitor, an older Ethan sat quietly in a wheelchair, looking directly into the camera. Slowly, the older Ethan smiled. Then he raised one finger and pointed behind the real Ethan. Every monitor suddenly filled with static. KRRRRRSHHH. Ethan spun around. The nurse was gone, but the corridor outside the control room was no longer empty. Wheelchairs lined both sides of the hallway. Every wheelchair faced the same direction, toward a pair of old operating room doors. One by one, the wheelchairs slowly began rolling forward on their own. Ethan followed them. The operating room doors opened by themselves. Inside, a single surgical lamp illuminated the center of the room. An elderly man stood beside an old operating table. He wore a faded white doctor's coat stained with age. His face was hidden behind a cracked surgical mask. Without looking up, he calmly said, "You're 23 minutes late, Ethan." Ethan froze. "Who are you?" The old man slowly removed his gloves. Then he answered, "I'm the doctor who signed your discharge certificate." He paused. "After you died." Ethan stepped backward. "That's impossible." The doctor silently placed a yellowed medical chart onto the operating table. Across the top, it read, "Patient, Ethan Carter. Status, deceased. Time of death, tomorrow, 8:47 p.m. Ethan's hands began to shake. The doctor looked directly into his eyes, then whispered. Suddenly, the operating room lights went out. Complete darkness filled the room. Ethan couldn't see anything. He could only hear his own breathing. Then, the lights flickered back on. The doctor was gone. The operating table was empty. Only the yellowed medical chart remained. Ethan slowly picked it up. The final page was blank. But as he watched, dark words slowly appeared by themselves. "Proceed to operating room 9. The patient is waiting." Before Ethan could move, a loud metallic alarm echoed through the hospital. Every corridor light turned red. A distorted announcement played through the old speakers. "Patient 428, your operation is about to begin." Ethan looked toward the hallway. Slowly, a pair of operating room doors opened by themselves. Above them, a faded sign read, "Operating room 9." Ethan took a deep breath. The red emergency lights continued flashing. Every step toward operating room 9 felt heavier than the last. The steel doors stood wide open. As he stepped inside, they slammed shut behind him. The room was freezing cold. In the center, beneath a single surgical light, lay a patient covered with a white sheet. The heart monitor beside the bed showed a slow heartbeat. Beep, beep. Ethan slowly walked closer. His hands trembled as he reached for the sheet. He pulled it back. His eyes widened in horror. The patient was Ethan Carter. His face was pale. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell with each breath. He looked completely alive. Suddenly, the unconscious Ethan slowly opened his eyes. Without moving, he whispered, "Don't let them complete the operation." Before Ethan could speak, the operating room door slowly unlocked. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. Someone was coming. Ethan stared at the man lying on the operating table. It was impossible. The face, the scars, even the clothes, everything matched. Suddenly, the operating room speakers came alive. A calm mechanical voice echoed through the room. Operation 428 will begin in 60 seconds. The lights dimmed. One by one, old surgical machines powered on. Rusty monitors flickered to life. Empty wheelchairs slowly rolled into the room. Then, the operating room doors opened. 6 surgeons walked inside. Each wore old blood-stained surgical gowns. Their faces were completely hidden behind cracked surgical masks. None of them spoke. They silently surrounded the operating table. Ethan shouted, "Who are you?" One surgeon slowly turned toward him, then removed his mask. Ethan's heart stopped. Under the mask was Ethan's own face. The other surgeons removed their masks too. Every one of them was another version of Ethan. Different ages, different scars, but the same eyes. The oldest Ethan stepped forward. He looked directly at Ethan, then quietly said, "We were never the patients. We were always the surgeons." Ethan couldn't move. 6 different versions of himself stood around the operating table. None of them looked surprised anymore. It was as if they had lived this moment hundreds of times before. The oldest Ethan slowly picked up an old surgical notebook. Its leather cover was cracked with age. He placed it into Ethan's hands. Across the first page, someone had written, "Operation Log, Patient 428. Ethan turned the page. Every operation had been carefully recorded. Operation 1, failed. Operation 18, failed. Operation 73, failed. Operation 156, failed. The final page made Ethan's blood run cold. Operation 428, status, in progress. Ethan looked up. What operation? The oldest Ethan stepped closer. His voice was calm. Every time you discover the truth, the hospital creates another version of you. He pointed toward the unconscious Ethan on the operating table. When the operation ends, your memories are transferred. Your body disappears. And the next Ethan wakes up believing he's the original. Ethan's breathing became rapid. No, that's impossible. The oldest Ethan slowly shook his head, then whispered, "You've already survived this operation 427 times." Suddenly, every heart monitor inside the operating room began beeping at once. Beep, beep, beep. Then, they all flatlined together. The heart monitors fell silent. One by one, the alternate Ethans disappeared into the darkness. Only the oldest Ethan remained. Without saying a word, he pointed toward the operating room floor. Suddenly, a deep metallic rumble echoed beneath Ethan's feet. The cracked tiles slowly split apart. A hidden elevator rose from underground. Its rusted doors opened by themselves. Above the entrance, a faded sign read, "Level 0. Ethan stepped inside. The elevator descended deeper and deeper until every sound disappeared. The doors finally opened. Before him stretched a forgotten underground laboratory. Dust covered every machine. Old hospital equipment stood frozen in time. At the center of the room, a large glass chamber glowed with a faint blue light. Inside lay a young man. He looked no older than 25. Ethan slowly walked closer. His hands began to shake. The face inside the chamber was Ethan Carter, but younger, healthier, completely untouched by time. A cracked metal plaque beneath the chamber read, Subject 001, the first Ethan Carter. Suddenly, the young man's eyes opened. He looked directly at Ethan, then quietly whispered, "You were never the original." Ethan couldn't breathe. The young man inside the glass chamber slowly sat up. Every movement felt unnatural, as if he had been asleep for decades. He placed his hand against the glass. Ethan did the same. Their hands met, separated by only a thin layer of glass. The young man smiled sadly. "My name is Ethan Carter. The first one." Ethan shook his head. "That's impossible." Subject 001 looked into his eyes, then quietly said, "You were created from my memories." Ethan stepped back in disbelief. Subject 001 continued. "Years ago, this hospital began a secret experiment. They wanted to copy human memories, so death would never erase a person. I was their first test. The experiment failed. Instead of saving one life, it created hundreds of versions of me." Ethan looked around the laboratory. Every photograph on the walls showed another Ethan. Different years, different lives, the same face. Then Subject 001 pointed toward an old steel cabinet. Inside rested the mysterious analog camera, covered in dust, connected to thick electrical cables. Subject 001 whispered, "The camera never predicted the future. It recorded every version of you that came before." Ethan slowly looked at the mysterious camera, then back at Subject 001. The laboratory had become completely silent. Subject 001 stepped out of the glass chamber for the first time. He looked exactly like Ethan, but calmer, as if he had already accepted his fate. He walked toward the old analog camera, gently placing his hand on it. Then he quietly said, "Every version of you exists because I refused to let go." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Subject 001 looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "The experiment should have ended with me, but I was afraid to die. So the machine kept creating another Ethan, and another, and another." Ethan stared at the hundreds of photographs covering the laboratory walls. Every face was his own. Every life ended the same way. Subject 001 slowly handed Ethan the camera, then whispered, "There is only one way to end the loop. Destroy the original memory." Ethan tightened his grip on the camera. "What happens if I do?" Subject 001 closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his face. Then he answered, "Every Ethan will disappear, including you." At that moment, the laboratory began to shake violently. Warning sirens echoed through level 0. A computerized voice announced, "Memory transfer sequence activated." The laboratory shook violently. Red warning lights flashed without stopping. Every monitor displayed the same message. Memory transfer, 98%. Ethan looked at the mysterious camera in his hands. Then, at Subject 001. Subject 001 smiled. For the first time, he looked completely at peace. Ethan closed his eyes. Then, with all his strength, he smashed the camera against the steel floor. Once, twice, a third time. Suddenly, the camera cracked. A blinding white light exploded across the laboratory. Every photograph hanging on the walls turned to ash. The hundreds of Ethan faces slowly disappeared. Subject 001 smiled one last time. Then, his body dissolved into thousands of glowing particles. The laboratory began collapsing. Ethan ran toward the emergency exit. The walls crumbled behind him. The ceiling fell. He reached the surface just as the entire abandoned hospital collapsed into silence. Dawn broke across the empty city. Ethan looked back. The hospital was gone, as if it had never existed. He took a deep breath. For the first time, everything was quiet. Then, A familiar sound echoed behind him. Click. Ethan slowly turned around. Resting on the hood of his car was another vintage analog camera. Beside it, a black evidence file. Across the front, fresh black letters appeared. Case number 429. Ethan reached toward the file. Before he could touch it, the camera switched on by itself. The screen displayed only one sentence. The first loop has ended. The real story begins now. Fade to black. Some mysteries are never solved.